get to my next guest now. I'm delighted to be joined by the Conservative Party peer, Lord Hannan. Lord Hannan, welcome to the show. It's a delight to have your company. Well, you didn't mix your words before we came on air. I won't sugarcoat it, you said. Trump's a deluded megalomaniac who's irreparably damaged the world order and increased the risk of war. Having listened into his speech in Davos today, are you still of that mindset, or do you think he's kind of feathered things down a bit more?
Well, that wasn't the speech of anyone damping things down, Martin. I mean, just that clip you played, never mind the whole speech, the clip you played just there, we handed Denmark back. How stupid were we to do that? Well, the reason that the US and the UK were in the Second World War is because we were against countries invading other countries just because they could. We'd signed the Atlantic Charter at the end of 1940. We'd committed ourselves to a set of principles to make the world safer and better. And one of those principles is that negotiation is preferable to war, that you don't change borders by force, that you recognize the territorial jurisdiction of other countries. So Donald Trump is the first US leader since then to have rejected that doctrine and said you can just take what you want because you're stronger. And you've got to ask, I mean, you know, was it going too far to say he was losing it? I mean, how else do you interpret a guy writing to the Prime Minister of Norway to say, because I have not been given the Nobel Peace Prize, I might just invade another country to show you all. By the way, not a country controlled by Norway. Even if Norway were in charge of the Nobel Peace Prize as a state, you know, sort of brilliantly third world way of refusing to recognise that the Nobel Prize Committee is independent of the government of Norway. So yeah, we are dealing with somebody, I'm afraid, who is now a threat to the global order that has made us richer and safer and more successful and freer for 70 years, and of which the US has been the main beneficiary.
Of course, the counter to that at today's speech in Davos, when Donald Trump said, I won't use force, I don't want to use force, but we do want Greenland back. He said, I'm seeking immediate negotiations to acquire Greenland, laying out quite clearly that he wanted to use Greenland as a bridge for his Golden Dome to defend the Western world. And it seems he'd like to do a deal now that could make the countries involved richer and more prosperous. Is there a middle ground where that could be acquired, or in your mind, is it still naked expansionism that should be stopped?
I mean, you see, the trouble with that is there is nothing that he couldn't do today. Under a treaty going back to 1952, the US can station whatever it wants. For defence purposes, Greenland is already a part of the US. But the US has not been using that right. It's been running down its installations in Greenland. It's gone from a peak of over 6,000 troops in the Cold War to fewer than 200 now. Now, I don't think this has anything to do with defence. If it were, a deal could indeed be done, but there is nothing that the US can't do now. I think Donald Trump let the cat out of the bag when he said, I have a psychological need. And I think this is all about wanting to be remembered as the guy who enlarged the US. And I mean, this is profoundly un-American, this idea of an unconstrained executive, that there are grown-ups in the room who have failed here. Congress could stop the tariff nonsense tomorrow. They could take back control of trade policy. The people around him could say, if this goes ahead, then you will face impeachment proceedings on grounds that you're no longer compos mentis. But he's surrounded by flatterers, by obsequious and servile careerists, and I'm afraid the system is failing. People are not doing that.
Are you saying there that you think Donald Trump's not in control of his full faculties?
Well, what did you think when you heard him just there? I mean, that kind of rambling stream of consciousness, well, I might use force, and if I did, I couldn't be stopped, and I've done... I mean, let's just go through what he was saying. I've done more for NATO than anyone else. No, he hasn't. He hasn't done a thing for NATO. All he's done is criticised it and publicly called into question its mutual defence. You know, you and I were both in the European Parliament. You will remember that the classic sort of giveaway of a tin pot dictatorship is when people couldn't understand that there were institutions independent of the state. When people would say, you know, why doesn't British Airways fly to my capital, or whatever it was? And you'd say, well, it's really nothing to do with the British government. You know, if there were enough customers, they would do that. This is how he is talking about the Nobel Prize. And I can only think of two other governments in history that have protested about the Nobel Prize going to someone they didn't like. One was China in 2010, when it went to a dissident, and one was Hitler in 1936, when it went to a German pacifist. But you know what? Even they were not complaining because they didn't win it. I mean, this is this is beyond narcissism. This is now a kind of clinical derangement. And if the system didn't work either with an obviously senescent Biden or with an obviously doolally Trump, then something has gone badly wrong.
Wow, doolally, mentioning in the same breath as Adolf Hitler, Lord Hannan, Chris Hope here is champing at the bit to get stuck in. Chris.
My jaws hit my desk to hear a Tory peer called Lord Hannan describing him as a tin pot dictator, unpredictable and like Hitler. I mean, surely, Lord Hannan, you've been around as long as I have observing politics. You're involved in politics now. Isn't this an individual who is simply trying to create space for a deal? He says outlandish things, unpredictable things. He's got his targets. He wants to do a deal, of course, on Greenland. He wants other things too. Is he not just saying things to get a reaction and create the space for a deal to be done? But to call him Hitler, you sound like a complete lefty, Lord Hannan.
This interruption is brought to you by ExpressVPN and their New Year deal. New Year, new VPN. And a huge saving of up to 80% if you act now. You're busy planning how to get in shape, but the hackers are planning how to get into your accounts. ExpressVPN locks down your connection so you can start the year protecting your data. So scan the QR code or click the link in the description now.
Well, if there were a real deal to be done in terms of stationing more troops in Greenland or something, that would be one thing. But there isn't. And there are always these people, Chris, who do what you've just done, I'm afraid, which is to come out with all these justifications that he himself never advances. Oh, it's all about missiles or rare minerals or something. Or there's always this army of sophists and apologists, because they don't want to face up to the fact that we are dealing with a vainglorious man-child who throws a tantrum whenever he doesn't get his way. Whether it's a business deal, a round of golf, or the 2020 election, he just can't stand not losing. And that is something that the founders of the US recognized as a danger to the Republic. They called it Caesarism. And they'd have clocked him for a two-bit Caesarist immediately. They knew people like him. What would I think really have horrified them is the passivity of the institutions around him, their reluctance to do anything because they're so focused on their own careers.
Bev Turner joins us now. Bev Turner, welcome back to the show. 4 times in 3 days. I'm starting to feel like I've won the lottery, but on a serious point. We just heard there Lord Hannan channeling Adolf Hitler, saying it was he's doolally, he's not in control of his faculties. To me, Donald Trump went in there and as clear as day, like it or lump it, just dropped his truth bombs. He made a very clear implication. I want to do a deal on Greenland. And basically, I think the most pertinent point at the end, you can say yes and we'll be appreciative, or you can say no and we will remember. Here's a man who means business.
Oh, Martin, I wish I'd been in the studio then to talk to Lord Hannan, because my blood was boiling. He said he is a threat to the global order. Yeah, he is. And that's why people love him. Because if you've been an MEP for years, as Lord Hannan was, and then you walk into the House of Lords, guess what you don't like? You don't like anyone who is a threat to the global order, because you've done very well out of the global order. But do you know what? In this country, in America, and at home in the UK, there are millions of people who feel that they haven't been served well by the current global world order. A lot of the people who've been responsible for those policies are in that room at Davos. They are wealthy beyond the wildest dreams of most people. And I don't know whether Lord Hannan is a man of considerable means. I suspect he probably is. But most people watching the TV will be saying, what about me? And that's the people that Trump is speaking to. That's why he got elected on a huge majority here. That's what democracy looks like, Lord Hannan. I'm really sorry if you don't like it, but there is something about the way Trump talks to people, the way he connects, the way he talks about his ambition to make their lives better, to make them feel richer and healthier and give them opportunity. That's what Trump is communicating. And to be honest, the more I've gone away and thought about the speech and looked at it and listened to the analysis that you've been doing brilliantly there in the studio, that speech was not just for the people in the room. It was for the voters outside. It was for the American people, and it was for, frankly, all those European people who agree with him. when he says things like, your countries are unrecognisable. He's speaking for everybody that's watching and looks at their high street and says, yeah, I agree with him. My country is unrecognisable. So people like Lord Hannan, who suddenly apparently have psychology degrees and can psychoanalyze somebody and work out how their mind is working, because everybody loves to do that with President Trump. And yet they haven't got the insight into themselves or the people around them to know why he's so popular.
Do you know, Bev Turner, something else he turned on there, which I think many people watching will agree. He specifically singled out the United Kingdom as having a failed energy policy. He's done this a few times now, but he did it in the epicentre of net zero. This is the Death Star of net zero. This is where the inner sanctum of net zero, of the net green plan, this is the birthplace of it. The billionaires, the vested interests, the global elites, the unelected elites, the Bill Gateses, and the world leaders who completely have signed up to that hook, line and sinker, the Mark Carneys, the Emmanuel Macrons, and Donald Trump just said, oil, it's beautiful. 50 million barrels of oil from Venezuela make more money in the next 6 months than it did in 20 years, and of the UK. He said the UK has only sources a third of its power from the North Sea, sitting on top of it, one of the greatest energy sources in the world, but they don't use it, and that's because the stupid people, he said, buy windmills.
Several years ago, Martin, this concept of environmental and social governance was born. And it's a little bit ambiguous, actually, as to where it originally came from. But there are some theories that it came after the 2008 crash, when the idea were that the bankers of the world needed a PR makeover. Nobody really got sacked because of that, even though lots of money was lost and the banks had to be bailed out by governments all around the world. Nobody really got sacked, but the bankers knew that they needed a PR makeover. So they came up with the idea of environmental and social governance, ESG, and it is baked into every single company now around the world, not just in America. And it's not even just the big companies, it's the small companies as well. And that's where they have to virtue signal. They have to virtue signal in order to get money from the bank, because you have to tick multiple boxes. And what we've seen today is Donald Trump take the pin out of the grenade and chuck it in ESG. And there'll be a lot of small businesses today who will be rubbing their hands and going, you've just done us a massive favour. Thank you, President Trump.
Well, Bev Turner, thank you very much for joining us. Now, listening into your comments there was our previous contributor, Lord Hannan. He'd like to come back online and respond to what you had to say there, Bev Turner. Lord Hannan, welcome back to the show. We kept you online. You'd like to have your right of reply. That's what we do on this channel. Everyone gets their go. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. That's very generous of you. I mean, a couple of points. I wish I were a man of means. I'm a newspaper columnist. I really don't think I'm part of the elites. I'd never go to Davos, unlike Trump. I was a founder of Vote Leave. And of that, you can agree with a lot of Trump's policies without that taking away from his obvious character flaws. So he's right about energy policy. He's right about ESG. No argument from me on any of that. But I'd ask Bev, or indeed any of his followers, two questions. First, on a personal one. If you had a grown-up child who behaved like him, with the boastfulness, with the lies, with the bullying, with the kind of fantastical stories about himself, how would you react? Would you regard that as something to emulate? And second, on the policy, we're dealing with someone who is sanctioning NATO allies, threatening NATO allies, while cozying up all the time to Russia. The one leader he has never, ever criticised, ever, is Vladimir Putin. And you've got to ask, if Putin had his own guy in the White House, if Putin actually had someone there whose job was to weaken the NATO alliance, destroy the West, not only in Ukraine, but in Greenland, in Canada, and all the rest of it with tariff policy, what would that person be doing differently from what Trump is doing? And, the fact that we didn't like his opponents very much shouldn't give him a pass on those things.
Okay, Dan Hannan, thank you very much for coming back in. I'm pleased to give you your right to reply. Beautiful stuff. Thanks for joining us on the show again, Lord Hannan. Thank you very much indeed. Wow, well, it all kicked off there. That's what we like to do on this show. Chris Hope, I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, everyone's disagreeing on this, as they should.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Kevin Badenoch thinks of what Lord Hannan says there. I mean, to suggest he's allied to Putin, he thinks that invasion wouldn't have happened had he been president, because he's a stronger president than, of course, Joe Biden was.